Have you ever wondered how much of who you are today was shaped by people who never truly saw your potential? It is unsettling, almost uncomfortable to realize that the quiet influence of others can mold your confidence, your decisions, even your identity itself. And yet this happens long before we notice. The most limiting people rarely shout, they whisper, they disguise their doubts as concern, their fear as advice, their insecurity as realism. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they redirect the path of your life. What makes this so dangerous is that it does not feel like manipulation. It feels familiar. It feels normal. You grow up believing certain things about your worth, your capacity, your destiny, without ever questioning where those beliefs originated. But when you begin to awaken, when your perception sharpens, you start to see how subtle influence can shrink you, soften you, or turn you into a version of yourself that feels painfully incomplete. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. This is the silent architecture of limitation. People who, knowingly or not, shape your inner narrative. They redefine what you think is possible. They clip your wings before you even attempt to fly. And the frightening truth is that most people spend their lives functioning under identities that were not chosen, but inherited from voices that never understood who they could become. You have felt this, haven't you? That strange friction between who you are and who you were taught to be. Stay with me, because what you will uncover next may surprise you. And before we continue, tell me in the comments if you have ever sensed someone quietly shaping your limits. Your experience matters here, and while you are at it, make sure to like this video and check if you are already subscribed, because understanding this content will change how you protect your mind going forward. Now breathe deeply as we move into a deeper layer of this truth, allowing the next insight to unfold naturally. When you begin to examine the influence of limiting people, something unexpected happens. Your perception shifts from the surface to the structure beneath it. You start to notice how subtle comments, familiar phrases, and repeated doubts slowly reshape the way you interpret your own life. Limiting people rarely act through force. They act through suggestion. They sow small seeds of hesitation, and because these seeds take root quietly, they grow into internal narratives that feel like your own voice. This is why their impact is so powerful. It blends into your identity so seamlessly that you forget it ever came from outside. And the distortion begins early. Someone tells you that you are too much or not enough, that your dreams are unrealistic, that you should stay where it feels safe. At first you resist, but repetition has a way of wearing down even the strongest intuition. Eventually you start shaping your choices around their expectations, not your potential. You compromise your vision without realizing you are doing it. You adopt beliefs that were never truly yours simply because they were offered at a vulnerable moment. Over time, you begin to operate from a smaller version of yourself. You hesitate before opportunities. You shrink before challenges. You question your abilities in moments where your real self would have stepped forward fearlessly. And the most alarming part is that all of this feels natural because you were conditioned to think that limitation equals protection, that doubt equals realism, that caution equals wisdom. But what if these voices were never guiding you? What if they were projecting their own fear? The truth is that people who cannot see their own potential will never be able to recognize yours. They shape you according to the narrow frame of their world. They redefine your boundaries to match their comfort zones. And unless you become conscious of this influence, you inherit their limitations as if they were destiny. This is how entire lives become misaligned, not through one dramatic moment, but through a slow erosion of inner clarity. As you start recognizing this pattern, something within you begins to rearrange itself, preparing the ground for a deeper understanding of how these limiting forces operate beneath the surface. As you become more aware of how certain people quietly shape your identity, you begin to notice specific psychological signals that reveal when someone is influencing you in ways that do not align with your growth. These signals are subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss, but once you recognize them, you start to understand how deeply they can affect the way you think, feel, and respond to the world around you. One of the clearest signs is the feeling of shrinking in someone's presence. You speak differently, hold back your ideas, or soften your ambitions because some part of you anticipates their disapproval. This internal contraction is not natural. It is a conditioned response to emotional pressure. Another signal appears in the form of hesitation. When someone has been shaping your self-perception, you begin second-guessing simple decisions, as if you're waiting for their approval even when they are not physically present. Their voice becomes internalized, echoing in your mind, guiding your choices as though it were your own thoughts. It creates an invisible dependency, one that many people mistake for respect or caution when, in reality, it is the result of prolonged psychological influence. There is also the subtle erosion of enthusiasm. When a limiting person has entered your inner world, your dreams begin to feel heavier, your goals less vibrant. You start lowering your expectations, not because you want to, but because you've absorbed their belief that life must be small to be safe. And then, without noticing, you adjust your identity to fit within the boundaries they've drawn. Perhaps the most revealing signal is emotional exhaustion. Conversations with limiting people drain you, not because the topics are difficult, but because your energy is spent suppressing your authentic self. You walk away feeling fragmented, uncertain, or strangely disconnected from your own potential. This fatigue is not random. It is the psychological cost of being shaped by someone who does not understand who you are becoming. When you start identifying these signals, your awareness sharpens, and you begin to see how influence forms long before you consciously recognize it. This growing clarity prepares you for the deeper truth. Not all limiting people act deliberately. Some genuinely believe they are protecting you, even while unknowingly restricting what you could become. The first type of limiting person often appears far more harmless than you would expect. They are the ones who speak softly, with a tone that resembles concern, but their words gradually undermine the structure of your dreams. They do not attack your aspirations directly. Instead, they question them in ways that make you hesitate. They ask if you are sure, if it is realistic, if it is worth the risk. And although their voice sounds gentle, it carries the weight of quiet discouragement. Over time, this constant drip of doubt begins to reshape your internal narrative. You start calculating your desires, not by what you feel called to pursue, but by what they will approve. What makes this person particularly limiting is that they frame their skepticism as wisdom. They interpret ambition as danger, passion as impulsiveness, and change as instability. They are uncomfortable with anything that stretches beyond the familiar, and because of that, they subtly teach you to remain within the boundaries of what feels predictable. They convince you that caution is maturity, but in reality, their caution is simply fear, wearing a sophisticated mask. If you look closely, you will notice that their warnings often come from their own unrealized potential. They fear watching you step into possibilities they abandoned long ago. Their limitations become the lens through which they evaluate your path. And because you may care for them, or trust them, or have known them for years, their words hold power, power that can quietly shrink your willingness to move forward. The tragedy is that many people never recognize the impact of this subtle discouragement. They accept it as guidance, absorb it as truth, and build their entire life around the restrictions someone else carried. But once you awaken to it, the dynamic becomes unmistakable. You begin to see how many of your abandoned dreams were never truly your decision, but the echo of someone telling you to play small. The second type of limiting person is the relentless critic, the one whose voice becomes a constant echo in your mind, shaping how you evaluate yourself even when they are no longer present. Unlike the subtle dream diminisher, this person operates through direct impact. Their remarks are often sharp, wrapped in the language of honesty or just being real, but beneath that veneer is a pattern of steady erosion. Every comment targets a different layer of your confidence, not enough to break you at once, but enough to weaken you over time. Their influence is most dangerous because it feels like a mirror. They convince you that their judgment reflects reality, not their own insecurities. And because their critiques come repeatedly and, without pause, you begin to internalize the idea that something is fundamentally lacking in you. You hesitate before taking action because you anticipate their reaction. You weigh your choices not by what feels true, but by how they might respond. Eventually, their voice becomes an internal checkpoint you cannot avoid. What separates this critic from healthy feedback is intention. Honest guidance helps you grow. Destructive criticism keeps you small. A person like this often masks their negativity as concern or responsibility, but their words carry no vision for your future, only dissection of your present. They may point out flaws, but never potential. They highlight mistakes, but never resilience. And slowly, you absorb the belief that your efforts will always fall short. This kind of influence can infiltrate every aspect of your life. You start doubting your creativity, your intelligence, your emotional strength. You hesitate to express ideas because you expect them to be dismissed. You avoid opportunities because you fear repeating what they have labeled as failure. Without realizing it, you start living through the identity they crafted for you, one built around inadequacy rather than possibility. Yet, the moment you begin to awaken, you notice how misaligned this internal voice feels. It does not sound like truth. It sounds like an inherited weight, one that never belonged to you. This realization opens a subtle doorway, the sense that your self-perception can be rewritten, that your worth was never meant to be measured by the narrow judgment of someone unable to see your potential. The third type of limiting person is the emotional controller, the one who subtly rewrites your sense of value through their shifting reactions and unpredictable approval. This influence does not begin with criticism or doubt. It begins with inconsistency. One moment they praise you, the next they withdraw, and without noticing, you start calibrating your actions to maintain their approval. Their emotional patterns become a silent rulebook, one you follow instinctively, even when it works against your growth. This person shapes you not through what they say, but through what they withhold. Their silence becomes a form of communication, their distance a form of discipline. When they offer warmth, you feel capable and seen. When they retract it, you question everything about yourself, and because their approval feels rare, you begin to chase it, believing that your value increases or decreases based on how they react to you. This is where the most subtle form of limitation takes root, the belief that worth must be earned rather than recognized. Over time, you start shrinking aspects of yourself to avoid triggering their disapproval. You suppress opinions, lower your ambitions, or become overly cautious with your emotional expression. You adjust your identity to remain within the version of you they find acceptable, and slowly, you drift further from your authentic self, operating instead from a place of emotional survival. This is not connection, it is conditioning. The emotional controller often justifies this dynamic by claiming sensitivity or misunderstanding, but their unpredictability is not accidental. It creates a cycle in which you feel responsible for their emotional state, and in that cycle, you lose clarity. You forget that relationships are meant to support growth, not dictate it. You forget that your inner world was never meant to depend on someone else's stability. But awakening brings a different perspective. You begin noticing how often you silence your own needs, how frequently you adjust your energy to avoid friction, how deeply you have confused control with care. And once that awareness emerges, you cannot ignore the subtle imbalance shaping your self-perception. You start to recognize that any connection requiring you to disconnect from yourself is not guidance, but a quiet form of limitation. The fourth type of limiting person is the quiet defeatist, the one who does not openly discourage you but subtly trains your mind to expect less from life. Their influence rarely comes through direct opposition. Instead, it emerges through the stories they repeat, the beliefs they reinforce, and the lens through which they interpret every event. To them, opportunity is always risky, change is always dangerous, and ambition is always unrealistic. Their worldview is built on the assumption that life shrinks as you grow older, and they deliver this message softly, as if it were a universal truth rather than a personal resignation. What makes the defeatist so limiting is that they often appear harmless, even comforting. They speak with the tone of someone who has been disappointed many times and wants to spare you the same fate. But beneath this apparent care lies a deeper pattern, the normalization of smallness. Every time you share an idea, a dream, or a plan, they offer a scenario in which things go wrong, not because they assess risk, but because they anticipate failure as the default outcome. And when you hear enough of their predictions, something inside you begins to adjust downward. Over time, this influence can reshape the way you forecast your own future. You stop imagining expansion and start preparing for limitation. You stop envisioning possibility and start expecting obstacles. Their voice becomes the internal whisper that tells you not to aim too high, not to expect too much, not to believe too deeply in your own potential. It does not break you violently. It dulls you gradually, replacing hope with caution, vision with hesitation. The most subtle effect is emotional numbness. Dreams that once felt exciting start feeling distant or unnecessary. Ideas that once sparked curiosity feel unrealistic. It is not that you lose your aspirations, it is that they lose color. And when that happens, you begin living reactively rather than intentionally, navigating life from a place that feels muted and misaligned. But awareness changes the entire landscape. When you finally recognize that this defeatist lens was never yours, you feel a shift, a small spark of clarity returning. You realize that someone else's fear has been shaping the boundaries of your world, and that reclaiming your vision begins with questioning the beliefs you accepted without noticing. The fifth type of limiting person is the subtle manipulator, the one who influences your identity, indirectly by shaping the emotional atmosphere around you. Unlike the critic or the defeatist, this person does not rely on negativity or doubt. Their influence works through emotional leverage, through carefully placed words and reactions that make you question your judgment while appearing supportive. They create a dynamic in which your clarity becomes blurred and your confidence becomes intertwined with their approval. This type of person often positions themselves as someone who understands you better than you understand yourself. They offer guidance that feels comforting, but beneath it lies an unspoken expectation. You are meant to align with their perspective. Whenever you express a direction that differs from what they envision, they respond with disappointment, confusion, or subtle guilt. Their reactions are never loud, yet they carry enough emotional weight to make you reconsider your choices. Over time, you begin to doubt your instincts. Simple decisions feel heavier because you anticipate how they might interpret them. You start filtering your thoughts, measuring your responses, adjusting your dreams so they do not disrupt the emotional balance this person silently demands. In this way, your authentic self becomes gradually edited, shaped into a version that fits their comfort rather than your path. What makes this influence so deep is its disguising nature. You may believe you are being understood, supported, even guided, while your autonomy is being slowly replaced by dependency. This manipulator does not need to control your actions directly. They simply control the emotional consequences of your actions. And because you care, because you value the connection, you adjust yourself without realizing how much of your identity you are surrendering. Eventually, you sense an inner conflict, a quiet tension between what you feel and what you express. You notice moments where your choices do not reflect your true desires. You recognize that you have been living in a way that keeps someone else comfortable, but keeps you misaligned. And this recognition is the beginning of reclaiming the inner authority that was quietly taken from you. The sixth type of limiting person is the hidden envious one, the individual who appears supportive on the surface, but carries an unspoken discomfort when you grow, evolve, or succeed. Their influence is not expressed through open confrontation or discouragement. Instead, it emerges through subtle shifts in tone, faint dismissals, or small comments that downplay your achievements. They congratulate you, but something in their expression feels misaligned. They smile, yet the warmth is missing. And because the signals are faint, you start questioning your intuition rather than their intentions. Envious individuals often remain close because they feed on comparison. They watch your progress not with admiration, but with a quiet sense of threat. Your growth reminds them of their stagnation, your breakthroughs highlight their unfulfilled desires, and your confidence exposes the parts of themselves they have neglected. Instead of confronting these feelings, they redirect them toward you in subtle ways that make you doubt your direction. Over time, you may notice that you soften your successes around them. You share less, celebrate less, or shrink your victories to avoid discomfort. Without realizing it, you begin dimming your light so they do not feel overshadowed. This behavior becomes a habit, reducing the natural expression of your growth. You start to believe that expansion creates distance and that progress must be managed carefully. But this belief is not yours. It is a reflection of the emotional limitations they projected onto you. The most damaging aspect of hidden envy is how it fragments your internal sense of safety. You are never sure how your achievements will be received. You anticipate reactions, adjust your enthusiasm, and question whether you should share parts of your life at all. This creates an emotional tension that quietly inhibits your potential. Growth becomes complicated, not because you are unprepared for it, but because someone close to you cannot celebrate it genuinely. Yet when awareness arises, everything becomes clearer. You begin to see that your light was never the problem. Their inability to hold their own is what distorted the connection. And as you reclaim this understanding, you start allowing yourself to expand again, without shrinking to accommodate the emotional limitations of someone who could not handle your evolution. When you finally recognize how these 6 types of limiting people have been shaping you, something powerful begins to unfold within. It is not a dramatic revelation, but a quiet awakening, a return to your own center. You start to notice the beliefs that were never yours, the doubts that did not originate from your voice, the decisions you made to accommodate the emotional landscapes of others. And in this awareness, your identity slowly realigns. You remember that who you become is not determined by the fears, insecurities, or projections of the people around you, but by the clarity of your own inner direction. Reclaiming yourself does not require confrontation. It requires recognition. Each time you choose authenticity over approval, your inner boundaries strengthen. Each time you trust your instincts over someone else's limitations, your path becomes clearer. And each time, you allow yourself to dream without shrinking. You create a life shaped not by inherited narratives, but by intentional expansion. The shift happens quietly. Your energy changes, your perspective sharpens, and your sense of self stops bending to the emotional weight of others. As this inner restoration unfolds, you realize that protecting your identity is not an act of distance, but an act of alignment. You begin to surround yourself with people who reflect your growth, not your fears. You choose conversations that elevate you rather than drain you, and gradually, your life starts to reflect the person you were always meant to become, not the one molded by external influence. If you reach this point, it means the message resonated deeply with you. Consider joining this space by subscribing to the channel, especially if these insights help you recognize your own strength with more clarity. And before you go, leave a comment saying, "This message was for me." It is a way of affirming your awareness and marking this moment of recognition. If this conversation touched something in you, a simple like helps this message reach others who need the same clarity. There is another video here that continues expanding this understanding from a different angle. Click and come with me for the next insight, allowing this transformation to unfold even further.